I have a little secret, and it's not really a secret if you know me at all. My small group's gonna laugh, but I don't handle like death really well. That's just like not something I'm good at. Funerals, I hate. I don't know what to say or to do when people are sick. I'm not the best person that, like, you're not gonna call me probably if you need something in a time like that in your life. Even just minutes before I came out here, I was talking with a girl from my small group, and she's traveling home to be with a loved one, and I was at that moment, I'm thinking, this is what I'm talking about. Like, I don't know what to say. I'm just so bad at it, and I just struggle. So usually I either completely ignore it, just, death doesn't happen, or it's something way down the line, or I just act like, it's not there at all, which is super healthy. But it was just really a struggle even to plan this night, because we're going to theme it around like this idea of death and life. And we were talking to people, oh, what's the theme? Or we're so excited we're coming. What are y'all talking about? Oh, we were talking about death. Oh, yeah, that's great. I'm so excited to come. I'm going to bring my friends. Like, no one says that. So it's just a really heavy topic. And if you know me, though, I love heavy stuff. I love to get into it. So this is something that I was excited to study about. But one of the ways that my family kind of has coped with death, and I called my mom to ask if I could have some information for this story. But you know how at funerals you get to, like, take plants home? Like, if you have a family member who dies, you get to take a plant home, and you kind of distribute them among your family. Well, there's this plant in my house when I was growing up, and his name was Dave. And I just couldn't figure out why my mom named a plant Dave, and I was like, who's Dave? We don't know anybody named Dave. So it turns out my grandmother named it Dave after a funeral. She got him at Dave's funeral, and so she took him home, and his name is Dave. And so my mom, when my great aunt Geneva died, brought home a peace lily, and we named her Geneva. And I just thought, oh, I just love this. And so as weird as it, you're probably thinking, wow, this is like really insensitive or just really dumb. But when I went to my grandfather's funeral a couple summers ago, which was the first time, like, in my adult life I was experiencing that. And I was just really excited to get my peace lily. I'm just really excited to name him. So I named him JP because my grandfather's name is James Paul. And so I was just super pumped about that. And everyone just has their own way of, like, coping and dealing with death. And that's just kind of the way that my family does it. So you can judge us if you want. But death is just a part of life. It's inevitable. We all know that no one can escape it. We all know that we have an expiration date at some point. That's just one of those things that you have to come face to face with. And funny story, as I was preparing this weekend, I needed a break. So Saturday I was studying, and I was like, you know what, I need a break. I need to do some, like, manual labor. And I got this new Jeep top for my Jeep Wrangler. I love my Jeep. I'm super excited. It's summer, top down, whatever. So I got this soft top. I'm like, oh, I'm going to trade them out. It's going to be so great. So I go in my garage, and I'm, like, taking off the hard top, like, hoisting it up. And I'm, like, pushing and pulling my Jeep in my garage, because you just throw it in neutral. It's just pretty easy to just kind of push it back and forth. So I was, like, kind of getting in around it, just moving it around. Like an hour and a half into it, I'm done, and the top looks great. I'm super excited. I'm sweaty. I love it. So I'm like, oh, I want to flip the top back so I can, like, see it. Well, I can't do that in the garage because of the ceiling. So I was like, oh, I'll just pull it out. So I get behind my Jeep, and I'm, like, pulling it out my driveway, and I realize, I realize my driveway is not flat. Y'all, it's sloped. And as I'm, like, pulling my Jeep, I'm like, oh, and I feel it, like, starting to push on me, and I'm like, oh, I got this, like, whatever. So I start to push it back, and then I instantly realize, like, Kaylee, this Jeep weighs 3,000 pounds. You're going to die underneath it right now. So luckily, my driver's side door was open, and I literally sprint around the side and hop in, pull the brake, and throw my foot on the brake in the car, and I just, like, barely, I'm talking, like, mailbox, Jeep, Tyler's car, like, we were going for it. My neighbor was outside, did not care, did not look. He doesn't like me. Whatever. But I literally almost died this weekend. I'm thinking, like, I'm shaking. I, like, get out. I'm like, I'm freaking out. And it's just so funny that you're going to teach on death. And then God's like, well, here you go. This is how you're going to die. But it's just me being dumb. I'm just an idiot. I was a dummy. And I didn't want to share that because part of me was like, they're going to be like, wow, you're so stupid. I'm very stupid. But it was just funny to me that God kind of did that to me this weekend as I was preparing for this. But honestly, death stirs up a lot of questions for me, probably for you. There's a lot that we just don't know about it, and a lot that we can't know until that time comes for us. And it's one of those things that you can't really fully plan. Like, you can think you have, like, stuff set up, and you can think you have your plans laid out, but it's just something you can't really plan for. But our goal tonight is to kind of step back from this super focused view of, like, my life right now, my circumstances right now, and look at a bigger picture. Because there's more to dying, I think, than what happens at the end of our lives. And I was reading through 2 Corinthians sometime back in February, and this verse just stuck out to me. It's 2 Corinthians 4:10, and it says, always carrying in the body death, so the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. And I just love that, like, always carrying in the body death, so that the life of Jesus, so death, but life. I just love that idea of that paradox, this idea of death, but also life. So they're both in there together. And I wrote in my Bible, always death, always life, and just thinking through that idea. And I wanted to study that paradox just a little bit more. Because honestly, we've all been touched by death in some way. If someone you know has died, or someone has fought death and, had some healing or something in their life, or things like that, but we haven't obviously gotten to experience it ourselves, and we won't get to until that time comes for us. And honestly, I don't handle death well, and so I was thinking, well, this is a great idea. Let's all kind of explore what this looks like and what Scripture has to say. So we're actually going to stay in 2 Corinthians, and we're going to be in chapter 4 and walk through just a little bit there about what it means to have death and life happening simultaneously. Basically, in this story, so Paul is writing this letter to this church, which he usually does, and they have this long emotional relationship. So it's a lot of like, why did you do this? Why do you hate me? I'm coming back to help you with this. I'm sending this guy to help you with this. All of these things he's writing to them just super emotionally. But the people in Corinth are super like wealthy, and all they care about really is like success and like climbing the ladder and what's the next thing and how can I have more, which kind of reminds us of our culture today. But he basically faced opposition preaching this like selfless suffering to a self-righteous, self-sustaining group of people. So it was a hard thing to sell to them, and they struggled to understand, well, I don't want this gospel if it doesn't promise me success. And so he wasn't exactly the picture of super health and wealth and things like that. Paul was suffering, and he writes to them every time about shipwrecks and stonings and things that are happening in his life, and they're thinking, well, I don't really want to be a part of that. Like, that seems pretty terrible. And it is. It's not glamorous. And so in chapter 4, he's teaching them this aspect of the gospel that they're just not getting and they're not understanding. In 2 Corinthians 4, verse 5, he says, "For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Christ Jesus as Lord." I'm just talking about, it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about Jesus as Lord. And that's the point of this whole thing. It's not about your status. It's not about your success or your name. But there is a part that we have to play in this. This is where we're going to pick up. We're going to be in verse 7 to start. And so take a look at 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7 through 9. "We have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed." So I love this idea of this treasure in jars of clay because it says a lot of things about us. It says that we're weak. So what does it mean to be weak? Well, that's like fragile, breakable, can't pull a 3,000-pound Jeep, weak. We are also ugly. I mean, treasured in like jars of clay are not cute. So they're plain, they're kind of unimpressive, they're probably really dirty and kind of chalky. And then also that we're replaceable. We're all expendable. We're just a means to an end. Each of us can be replaced by something else. And the point here is that contrast, that treasure in a clay jar, because we put the treasure in the jar to show that the treasure has nothing to do with the jar. And that's the whole point. So you put the treasure in the jar so you can say that the treasure has nothing to do with the jar. So it's kind of like an engagement ring. And I was talking through this illustration earlier. They come in those little like fuzzy black boxes, and like you don't care. Do you care? Because the ring inside of it is what's so important. You throw the box away, or the boxes are probably a little bit fancier now, but they used to just be a little black fuzzy box. It's not about the black fuzzy box. It's about the ring that's inside. The ring that's inside the box is the thing that you're going to be wearing, and the thing that he paid thousands of dollars for, even more so today. They just keep going up. But all of these things are just inside the box, and the box is just a tool. It's not the important part. And so the treasure is like that. It's not about the jar. But at the same time, the jar is valuable because of what it contains. And the jar is valuable because it's the medium for the message. And the jar is valuable because it means that there is hope. Because we're weak in that we're afflicted, and we're weak in that we're perplexed. We're weak that we're persecuted and struck down. But God's power is because we're not crushed. We're not driven to despair. We're not forsaken. We're not destroyed. And that's how he displays his power in us. So keep reading verse 10. This is my favorite. This is the part. "Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies." And I love that always. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus. Always death, always life. So what does it mean? Okay, great. What does it mean to be tied to Jesus in death and life? And so we're going to flip to Romans 6 real quick, and I'm going to read just a little bit to shed some light on what that actually looks like. And I'm going to read it in the Message because I think it gives us a little bit of clarity in this paraphrase compared to what Scripture actually says. But we're going to read Romans 6, 3 through 11. "That's what baptism into the life of Jesus means. When we are lowered into the water, it's like the burial of Jesus. When we are raised up out of the water, is like the resurrection of Jesus. Each of us is raised into a light-filled world by our Father so that we can see where we're going in our new grace sovereign country. Could it be any clearer? Our old way of life was nailed to the cross with Christ, a decisive end to that sin-miserable life, no longer at sin's every beck and call. What we believe is this: if we get included in Christ's sin-conquering death, we also get included in his life-saving resurrection. We know that when Jesus was raised from the dead, it was a signal of the end of death as the end. Never again will death have the last word. When Jesus died, he took sin down with him, but alive, he brings God down to us. From now on, think of it this way: sin speaks a dead language that means nothing to you. God speaks your mother tongue, and you hang on every word. You are dead to sin and alive to God. That's what Jesus did. And I just love that description of what it means to be represented by Jesus in death and also in life. And if the gospel is based on the death and resurrection of Jesus, then how much more would our lives be based on that pattern as well? Because Jesus' death and his resurrection created a pattern that our lives were intended to follow. The cross was a once and for all end to sin and death. We're free from sin, meaning literally that we're justified. That's our status. So nothing can change our standing with God, and we know that Jesus defeated sin and that there's a place for us in eternity. So if Jesus defeated death and sin, why do we still have to experience it? And I think there's something more there. Why is there a struggle? Why are we still always carrying this death with us? And it points to another paradox of this already and not yet. And I'm sure you've heard this so many times, that we have this promise of forever with Jesus, but we don't get to be with him just yet. And we already have this freedom from sin's sentence, but we still struggle with it daily. This paradox of, I already have this, but not yet do I get to have it. And I think there's more to dying than just a one-time thing. So read verses 11 and 12 next in 2 Corinthians 4. For we who lived are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. So here's that always again. Just another reminder that we're never going to escape this process of death, this thing that's happening all the time. And there's another paradox here in these verses, and that's suffering versus glory. So God's power is made most obvious through suffering. And honestly, suffering doesn't feel super glorious at the time, but suffering isn't taking something away. In reality, it's showing something off. It's unlocking something in you. It's revealing something greater, something more. Because suffering is an opportunity rather than an obstacle. And I think that's one of the first things that you learn in this passage is it's more than that. It's not just this is me going through this suffering right now, but there's something happening after this and during this that's going to be an opportunity for God to use me later. And there's another paradox here too. Our death means life in others. So you're telling me, my death is going to give something to someone else, some sort of life. Because honestly, life has a fair amount of suffering involved if you've lived for any amount of time. But the point of your life is for others to experience life. And I think that's so cool because the death working in us works life in those around us. Because honestly, it's not that we're dying for the sake of dying, because that's pointless. But there's a why, and there's always a why. And you know that the why is always people. That's why we talk about loving well here and shaping the way that you love others, because that's our why. So think about who is your why, who around you needs to have life given from you, and who needs life from you. Because honestly, people crave something real. People crave something true. They want to know that you've been through something, that you've gone through something in your life, because we want to know that you're a human, that you're struggling and suffering like we are. And you've been on social media, so Instagram, Facebook, whatever your choice is, and you see these really perfect people and perfect lives, and there are literally people out there that make a living by being a brand, by posting, you know what I'm talking about? They're posting stuff and it's just them living life, buying coffee somewhere, or these are the shoes I got, and like it to know it, or whatever that tag is. And okay, but they're making money doing that, just being this perfect image and this perfect person. But we all love it and we follow them and we like it, and some of y'all might do that, and good for you. My life is not that great. But that's so cool. So I love all that. But at the same time, at the end of the day, when I need somebody, or if I'm going through suffering, or someone in my life's going to pass, who do I call? I'm not going to call those people because, well, how would they even know what's going on? How could they relate to me because their lives are so perfect? So honestly, we are craving this suffering, to know that you suffer too. I'm suffering, you're suffering. So maybe you have something you could share with me, some life that you could also give to me. And I love this Warren Wiersbe quote. I tweeted it the other day. After you've suffered a while, you will have a message worth listening to. And I just love that because it's so true. I'm not going to listen to you if I don't think you've gone through something real in your life. And even if you have, it's the element of not sharing it and not having that community and sharing life with each other. So who can benefit from your suffering? And thinking of it that way, because that is the why. All right, we're going to finish this up in verse 13 through 15 of 2 Corinthians 4. Since we have the same spirit of faith, according to what has been written, I believed and so I spoke. We also believe and so we also speak, knowing that he who raised the Lord Jesus will raise us also with Jesus and bring us with you into his presence. For it is all for your sake, so that as grace extends to more and more people, it may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God. So I just love this tie-in, too, that we accept all this suffering and we accept all of these things in our lives because we know the end game. Like, we know what happens. We know how it all ends. And I was listening to this sermon a while back about Job by J.D. Greer, and he said, why do we need every chapter to be good when he promises the last chapter will make all the other chapters make sense? And I love that idea. Like, that stings a little bit because I want all my chapters to be good. But if I know in the end how the story ends and that there is a win, then maybe I can go through that suffering just a little bit more. And I love this section, too, because he quotes Psalm 116, which Psalm 116, y'all, if you need something to read, is so good. Just read that on your own time. But this is so good. He quotes it right from here. I believed even when I spoke, I am greatly afflicted. He's talking about going through the fear of death and the fear of dying and that he needs God to deliver him. And even though he's suffering, even when I'm suffering, I still believed because he knew the truth and that we can know the truth, that God promises us a win even when we're suffering. And honestly, y'all, like, I would love to come up here and be like, I have this story of suffering and I've come through it on this end and this is how, like, I can encourage you in that. And I just don't have that story yet. But I know that this current season in my life right now, that God is working that story in it for me. And I mean, I can tell you about losing loved ones. I can tell you about a broken off engagement. I can tell you about being rejected by your dream job. I can tell you about being next to my best friend when she lost her baby. But, like, I have more that's coming that I think God's writing a bigger story for me. And I know that, like, this season of life of suffering right now, however long it's going to be, that God's going to have something bigger for me. And I don't mean bigger like Kaylee's bigger, but I mean bigger that he's going to deliver me in such a way where I can only say, like, that's God, and that he taught me something through this, and that I'm a better person because of it. And so I'd love to share with that stuff with you, and I know that you all have stories in this room that could just beat all of this out of the park, stories of suffering and stories of things that you have gone through and just life lived. And I think that that's the whole point of this, is that we can sit together and we can share those things because we know the truth, because we know there's a purpose, and we know in the end what happens. And I know in the end, through my season of suffering, that God wins ultimately. And maybe that's you tonight. Like, maybe you lost your job. Maybe your marriage is struggling. Maybe your children are sick or misbehaving. Or maybe you're stuck at a dead end and you don't know what to do. Or maybe you're waiting for a perfect relationship to come along. Or whatever that is, whatever the suffering is you're experiencing right now, even when you are suffering, you can know that Jesus paid the price for you. And we know, just like this verse says, we know that the same Jesus that was raised to life will also raise us, because Jesus' resurrection guarantees our resurrection. So what would you endure if you knew that the outcome was going to be in your favor? Because I'm pretty sure if you told me, like, the end story was good for me, like, I'd pretty much do anything. Like, I'd endure a lot of stuff for some good things to happen to me. And that's something that we can know. We can know that Jesus' death bought us life now, and his resurrection guarantees life for us later. Because we know that, we can move forward, and we can remember the why. So verse 15 again, what's the why? It's for your sake, so that as grace extends to more and more people, it may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God. Grace creates gratefulness and glorifies the Creator. That's why. We know the why. This is bigger than us, and we tend to allow our suffering, honestly, I do, to be selfish. It's about me. I feel bad about myself. I'm struggling. It's hard. But it's not really for us. Because in our temporary suffering, God offers eternal hope. And so for you, maybe you're looking at your current circumstance. So you've just got this honed-in vision right now. And some of you, you're in the middle of a season of suffering. I'm there with you. Whether it's something that's out of your control or something that you brought upon yourself, it doesn't matter. Dying is dying, no matter what causes it. But the question is, can you identify the one thing that God is trying to kill in you? So what is that thing? What is the thing that he has brought this suffering about for? Because honestly, there's a purpose behind it. There's a struggle behind it. What does it point to? And so tonight, we're going to take a little bit of time before we do questions, And I want you to think about this one question right now. What in your life needs to die so that you can live? And there's a list of things. We can put this list up. There's a list of things that we can die to. Selfishness, greed, desires and wants, sin. Maybe there's a habit that you have right now that you know what it is, and it's causing some death and some suffering in you. Do you need to die to that? Fear and anxiety. This one's huge. Lust, excess. So like wanting more, always needing more. The next thing, the biggest thing. Comfort. Maybe you just want to be really comfortable in your life and you're cool with that. Entitlement, passivity, or laziness. Anger, dreams. Maybe it's a dream that's not given to you by God and you need to die to that. Schedules. This one's huge. Are you tied to your schedule? Expectations. And that's just like a tiny list of all the things that we could die to, the things that get in the way, the things that our suffering brings to light. And I wrote this in my journal the other day. That's the thing about dying. It's not something you actually want, but it's required. So like nobody wants to be put in a position to work, to discover these things and then take the steps to get rid of them. Like it's hard work. It's super messy and it's super time consuming. But no one knows that better than the one who went before us. Because Jesus' death was painful. It broke him. And it's not that he didn't feel any of its effects, but it had no power over him. And so take some time to think about this question. What in your life are you giving power to that has no power over you?